of your companies do business outside of the U.S.? Show of hands. Okay, so it looks like, a little bit over half. And of your companies that are doing business internationally, do you happen to know how many of them are doing foreign currency transactions as a result of the business? Okay, so there's a number of you here. Gary and I, when we look to build up our client base, we reach out to companies. Believe it or not, companies aren't knocking on our door looking to do business with us, so we have to go out and get clients. And over the course of, let's say, a month, I figured that I talked to about 50 new companies per month in those efforts. So over a 2-month period, I did a little research on the companies I was speaking to. So out of the 100 companies that I spoke to, 58 of them did business internationally. So 58% of the companies did business internationally. Now, they may be domestic in nature, but maybe they bought a piece of equipment from overseas as part of their production facility. But that, to me, was they did something internationally. Does anybody know, of those 58 companies, how many of them did foreign exchange? Anybody want to hazard a guess?
58?
I wish. That would be 100%, and that's certainly not the case. Of the 58, I'm sorry?
10%.
10%, no. Lower.
Yeah.
5%. 3 of those companies that I talked to did foreign exchange. So 5% of those companies did foreign exchange. And it boggled my mind. I said, well, all these companies are doing business internationally, but they dealt in U.S. dollars. And I began to wonder, why is that the case? Hi, there's a seat right there if you'd like to grab that. Why is that the case? So as I talked to these companies, one of the common themes that I found out is, we only deal in dollars. We want to keep it as easy as possible. Okay? Pretty simple. We don't want to, do anything that's going to cause any additional work for us. When I talk to centers of influence, CPAs, attorneys, bankers, they commonly said, I have a lot of clients that do business internationally, but they just deal in dollars, so FX is not an issue. So why is that the case? So what I wanted to do is take a look at, the progression of where the dollar is today and why we're at the current why the dollar is so strong and why everybody's using dollars here in the U.S. So I have to go back about 60 or 70 years to start. And I hate to give you a history lesson, but I figured we'd start there. The first thing is after World War II, or prior to the end of World War II, Bretton Woods happened. So 44 Allied countries met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, in 1944 to hammer out the future of the world economy, the monetary system, the banking system. And what came out of Bretton Woods is several things. The first thing that came out is that the establishment of the International Monetary Fund, the entity that became eventually the World Bank, and then they also hammered out how the monetary system would work post-World War II. And one of the big things that came out of it is the transfer of economic power from the UK to the United States. Prior to World War II, international trade was dominated by the United Kingdom. So the Brits dominated international trade. However, World War II was so devastating to their economy and their institutions, their power was just cut down to virtually nothing. But the U.S. came out of World War II unscathed. The economy was thriving, the production was way up, and the banking system in the U.S. was in place as well. So what they did is they established the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency at Bretton Woods. And what they did then is they pegged all of the currencies to the U.S. dollar. So they said, all right, so the U.S. dollar is going to be here, everybody's going to pay their currencies to it, and then that way we can have trade amongst countries and not have some loud fluctuations in exchange rates and inflation. And what the U.S. did on its own is they decided to link the dollar to go to $35 an ounce. Hence the phrase, the U.S. dollar was good as gold. So, in addition to that, the last thing is most international transactions that were happening just after World War II, as the Marshall Plan was going into effect and the rebuilding of Southeast Asia and Europe, most international transactions were denominated in U.S. dollars. The next thing that happened is, so this dollar convertibility to gold at $35 an ounce went on through 1971. What happened was banks around the world could take their dollar holdings and present it to the U.S., and the U.S. would have to give them gold. And a lot of banks did that. So by 1971, the U.S. gold reserves were down to about $10 billion worth of gold, which was about half of the 1960 levels. And there is much more currency in circulation worldwide at all the banks than the U.S. held gold. In addition to that, because of inflation here in the U.S. and funding the Vietnam War, there was a lot of economic forces at play. So Richard Nixon decided in 1971 to stop the gold dollar convertibility. So when that happened, basically currency started to depreciate against the dollar, others appreciated, allow a little bit of flotation in the currencies, and then it also opened up the door for floating exchange rates. After 1971, the Smithsonian Agreement called for the flotation or floating of exchange rates. It allowed for more currencies to be used in international transactions as currencies started to move. And then also, because of the movement in the currencies, because of the economic viability of some of the countries as a result of that, the precursor to the EU kind of started to form. And so that all led eventually to over 111 currencies being in place. So if you look at the list of all the currencies here, not every one of these is traded. So because the U.S. Has certain restriction on currencies, you can't trade, let's say, the Iranian currency, the North Korean currency, things of that nature. At Commonwealth, we do about 90 plus currencies that we can trade in. So this gives you an idea of what's happened since post-World War II. How many currencies are in circulation and how that works. But that wasn't the demise of the U.S. dollar. The dollar is still held as a major reserve of all central banks. So as you can see, up to 60%, above 60% of all central bank reserves are denominated in U.S. dollars. Now, over the years, you hear a lot of talk about, prior to the financial crisis of 2008, central banks were pounding their fists on the table saying, well, we're going to reduce our dollar holdings and increase our euro holdings. That's when the dollar is trading about $1.60 per euro, the all-time high. And now people are talking, well, the Chinese yuan is going to be taking over the dollar as the reserve currency of the world. So over the years, over the last 50 years, that's come up every couple of times, every decade, that one currency is going to replace the dollar. But it just hasn't happened yet. Now you can see the euro is just a second, in the mid-20s as far as a reserve currency, but the dollar still dominates from a reserve currency standpoint. What does that mean in terms of foreign exchange turnover? For every foreign exchange transaction, you have two currencies. One currency buying another currency. So as you can see, the dollar, if you look at the percentages there, dominates foreign currency transactions. So of the approximately $4 trillion a day in FX turnover, about 85% of that FX turnover includes the dollar as one of the currencies in those trades. You see the euro coming in as a distant second, and then there's a big drop-off as you move down the list. Now, you see China and India down about 1%. That's starting to change. This is a report from a couple years ago by the Bank of International Settlements. So the amount of Chinese yuan being used in day-to-day trade is starting to increase, but only really in the spot market and the forward market. Option markets and swap markets don't really exist yet for the Chinese yuan. So again, if you look at the dollar's still king out there in terms of currency of choice for people to do business in. One of the other things that we take a look at is, let's go back to companies based here in the U.S. and say, why are they so dollar-centric? Why is their mentality so based on the dollar? Well, there's several factors that go into it. The first one is, these companies have the benefit of being located in the world's largest economy. You could start a company here in the U.S., build your company up to a sizable, big size, and be very successful because you happen to be in the world's largest economy. You don't have to go elsewhere to get business if you do it right here. The second thing is geography. When you think about North America, you've got Canada and Mexico and the U.S. and North America. All right? You can take Western Europe, over 20 countries in Western Europe, and fit it nicely into the midsection of the U.S. You know, from Ohio through Colorado, you could fit most of Western Europe there. If you talk to anybody that grew up in Europe, they'll tell you that when they grew up, they dealt with foreign exchange from a very early age, you know, through their childhood to graduates, you know, when they were graduates into companies. That's because of the proximity there. They had to do business outside of their own countries. You know, France, Germany, Spain, Italy. All those countries did a lot of cross-border transactions, and a lot of people traveled. So people were used to dealing with foreign exchange. This is part of their daily fabric. Here in the U.S., no one really has had an opportunity. You know, I grew up in Buffalo, New York, which is right across the border from southern Ontario, Canada. My parents, when I was a young teenager, owned an ice cream store. So I'd be working the ice cream store, and people would come in from Canada to get an ice cream cone, and I'd have to do foreign currency. You know, the discount rate's 22% today, sir, and you give me your change back. You know, that was my exposure, you know, but it was really just selling an ice cream cone in Buffalo, New York.
Did you keep the spread?
We didn't know what spread was back then, but the bank that we could get the money to kept the spread. But so we didn't know what FX was, and you know, if you're here in the U.S. in most states, you're never going to come across a situation where you're going to be trading currency from one currency to another. So now you have people that, you know, through their childhood, through their teens, high school, college, and now they enter the workforce and they're working for companies, and they've never ever done a foreign exchange transaction. And now they're accountants at companies. And you know, now they're expected to learn something at that age when they were really never exposed to it. So that experience is another reason why people here in the U.S. say, hey, let's keep it simple, let's keep it with dollars. So in our efforts, when we're out there talking to companies, we came across three traps. You know, there's a lot of traps, but three most common traps that we came across that we felt that companies could do it a little bit better, they could be doing it a little bit different, they could save themselves some money. So I wanted to get into the very first trap, which is funding of international subsidiaries. So how many people here have clients that have international subsidiaries? Okay, all right. So do you think, just really very quickly, that they pay their subs, if they have to fund their subs, in dollars, or do they send them foreign currency? In dollars. Okay. So I had talked to a company, and these are all real examples. These are examples of companies that I work with. Talked to a company, it's a farm, so they have agricultural. So they have farms in the U.S., and they also have a farm in Chile, and they can do production year-round because southern hemisphere, northern hemisphere. So I sat down with the CEO and the CFO, and we're talking about the subsidiary down in Chile. I said, well, how do you have to fund them, or are they self-funding? Yeah, you know, we send them dollars, you know, during the busy season, maybe a couple $100,000 a month, you know, maybe $100,000 per transaction, and they just convert it down there. You know, our general manager handles that, and you know, I really don't know what the exchange rate is, but I'm sure it's fine because you know it's down in Chile, it's the Chilean peso. I'm like, all right, well, do you know what the exchange rate is? No, don't know what the exchange rate is when they do the transfers. But then he goes, wait a second. He goes, I have access to our account online with the Chilean bank. Let me go check. So he leaves the meeting, comes back 10 minutes later, and he's got a statement. He goes, okay, so we did this transfer on this date. So on that date, he did this transfer. He sent $100,000 to their sub in Chile. Okay, they bank with the community bank, you know, here in the U.S. So the community bank charged him $45 for the outgoing U.S. dollar wire. And then the receiving bank in Chile, when they received the funds in, they took a 0.5% fee right off the top. So right off the top, they're down $500 when the Chilean bank receives it. Then they converted the remaining amount, the $99,500, over at an exchange rate of $488. Now the market rate that I put there, $495.50, was the low of the day. So I want to just kind of compare apples to apples by taking the low of the day. Probably their spread's going to be bigger than 1.5%, you know, because they probably didn't do it right at the low of the day. So the sub in Chile got 48,556,000 pesos credited to their account. So they've been doing this for years, and you know, it's pretty simple. All we do is go to our community bank and we send dollars, and you know, it's magic. They get Chilean pesos, you know, so there's never an issue. So we started to dig and take a look at what was going on. I said, all right, well, let's see what the cost is. So in their mind, their cost is $45, which is the fee to send it, But in reality, the actual cost is well in excess of $2,000. And they never realized that because they didn't have operational awareness of what the exchange rates were down there or how the bank was doing it, or that there was an alternative way to do it. So we started to do some of these transactions and did a price comparison. We took the same $100,000, and that company goes to an FX provider, whether it's a bank or a broker, like us. Fees can vary up and down from anywhere from $0 to $50. So this particular FX provider charged $10. The rate on that was $4.92, which is 0.7% spread. Now, here's the crux of the whole thing. You really don't know what kind of spread is being taken when you do transactions. Okay, when you're dealing with banks, dealing with FX providers, they could take a spread from 0 to 5%. Okay, it's really buyer beware. The FX markets are truly the only unregulated financial industry in the world. Okay, there's no control over what kind of spread can be taken.
Even within a bank?
Even within a bank.
Thank you.
Now the bank may have internal limits because they don't want to get bad publicity, but I know that I've worked with a bank for 26 years. Spreads could be really wide. Okay?
So it means we can negotiate.
You can negotiate, absolutely, absolutely.
All this business with the credit card companies that, there was this huge upheaval when they were overcharging everybody and they had to give their money back.
All of that. I mean, foreign exchange is really a great opportunity for companies to make money. But here's the thing. With the onset of the internet and access to exchange rates, back in the day when I first started, the only access that people had to the exchange rates was by looking at the Wall Street Journal, which was rates that were published at 4 o'clock the previous day by Bank of New York that they sent a fax over to the Wall Street Journal. So that's how people knew the exchange rates. Now, you can look at 20 different websites and get pricing that's really close to the actual market. So, there's awareness now if you really want to do it. But people are still having spreads taken out. So what companies are starting to do, and I don't want to make this commercial, but what we do is we negotiate a fixed spread so the clients know exactly what they're getting. So in this case, it's a 0.7% spread. So the Chilean pesos that the sub gets is 49,200,000 Chilean pesos. Okay? So what's the cost of that transaction? In the company's mind, it was $10 because they pay their FX provider $10. But the actual cost was $710. It's a 0.7% spread plus the fee. So the savings to this one, about $1,300, or an additional 644,000 pesos to the subs account in Chile. All right. So there's obviously you can see some of the benefits of doing something like this, but there's much more than just the savings. The benefits, you look at control over the process. Instead of just shipping money down south and saying, all right, this bank who has no idea who we are, who we really don't have a strong relationship with, we just have an account set up with them, we're giving control of this to them. The company here in the U.S. keeps that control, and they can negotiate the rates and they can develop the relationship. Also, it gives them an operational awareness of the exchange rate. And when I first started talking to them, they'd be like, yeah, seems like the rates are high during the off season, and then we start getting into paying these guys, the rates started going down, It's like, all right, well, here's the situation about the Chilean peso. The peso is tied heavily to commodities. They're a major copper-producing country. So as commodity prices increase, the Chilean peso, the value of that peso is going to go up and down as well. In addition to that, Chile has one of the most open and transparent banking systems and governments in South America. So, it's actually very, you get surprised when you start looking into this. You're doing very, yes?
Yeah, they also have a wonderful pension system, which, it was borrowed from the University of Chicago economists, and they're like cutting edge.
Right. So, I mean, things like that, show that the country is just not, some backwater country. They've got a growing economy. They've got a currency that's, while fluctuating, is not going to be one of those currencies that are going to suddenly depreciate by 15% because, there's undue speculation. So you begin to understand and see what goes into the exchange rates there. In addition to that, if you have an exposure, you can proactively hedge it. And we actually ended up doing some non-deliverable forward contracts with this company. When the rates shot up, They got up to about 520 pesos, and we locked them into a couple of non-deliverable forwards at 515 pesos per dollar. When those settled, we were down to around 473 pesos. So they basically hedged and protected themselves there. And in addition to that, when companies work with foreign exchange providers, whether it's your bank or a broker, if you're a client providing revenues to them, that bank or broker is going to help you out with your FX. It's amazing to me that companies go out and they hire outside counsel, legal counsel, they hire outside accountants to do a lot of the work for them, and they outsource a lot of stuff. But when it comes to something like this, they try to do it internally. Well, they can find someone that they outsource it to, which is a bank or FX provider, that's going to help them through a lot of the issues that they don't understand. And that's really important, and it can be really helpful and useful, especially for companies that are expanding internationally or looking to get into international markets. Go and get that expert to come in and help you do that, and they're not going to charge you a fee. They just want the business because they can take a spread and make revenues that way.
How do you protect yourself from the fluctuations of the exchange?
We go out and we back to back.
Okay, so they're simultaneous.
Exactly. So we don't take on risk. Some banks will take on risk. Some brokers will take on risk. We as a firm decide we don't want any risk. So that's the first trap. The second trap, which is the most common trap that we see out there, is importing goods in U.S. dollars. I hear this all the time. Our vendor has no problem being paid in dollars, which is great for us. It's easy. Piece of cake. Well, there's a reason it's not a problem for the vendor. A lot of times it's because the vendor's used to dealing in U.S. dollars, number one. Some of them may have dollar accounts or they have a hedging strategy in place. But if they're going to have to deal in a currency other than their own, they're going to protect themselves. So what we see is that the international suppliers, when they price invoices in U.S. dollar terms, they put a little bit of a buffer in there. And that buffer could be up to 10% or above. All right? So they have cost in, let's say, Mexican pesos, and when they sell in peso terms, this is what their costs are. But if they have to sell in dollar terms, they're going to add a spread in there and say, well, here's your U.S. dollar invoice. Okay? Which is exactly what happened with this company. This company buys some product from Mexico. They received this invoice, and on the invoice, it says specifically, total pesos due, 292,410, or total dollars due, 23,870. Well, the company just immediately, we just pay dollars. It's super easy. We just go to our bank and send a wire transfer, and it's taken care of. Okay. Now these aren't huge amounts, so it's nothing really to get all crazy about. But it proves a point. And in addition to that, over the course of a year, if you extrapolate this information, over a course of a year, that could be a sizable amount. So, taking a look at the transaction, the company goes to their bank, a different bank, that's why the fee is only $35. The exchange rate used by the supplier to invoice in U.S. dollars was 12.25 pesos per dollar. Well, the exchange rate that day on March 11th was 12.54. So the supplier took like a 2.3% markup, which actually in reality is not that bad. But this invoice is going to be paid immediately, so they didn't have a lot of risk there. So they probably didn't want to take a big spread. I guarantee if this invoice was due in 60 or 90 days, that spread would be closer to 5 to 10%. Okay? So client happily ships off the 23,870 to the Mexican supplier. And what's the cost of that? So from the company's eyes, it's a $35 fee and they're good to go. In reality, because of that 2.3% markup in the exchange rate, it's costing them over $500 for that transaction.